The Charleston Museum is deeply rooted in preserving and celebrating the rich history of our iconic city. They are joining in the celebration of Women's History Month by highlighting a few heroines of history. Elise Reagan, Chief of Education for the museum, is joining us today. Elise, it's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
So something I need to highlight first is the National Women's History Alliance. Every year they pick a theme, and this year's theme is Women Who Advocate for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I feel like the poster children for that is the Grimke sisters, which you're going to be highlighting at an event happening tomorrow at the Charleston Museum.
Yes.
But can you give us an overview of who the Grimke sisters are?
Yeah, of course. So the Grimke sisters are pretty famous here in Charleston, or maybe not as famous as they probably should be. So the Grimke sisters were sisters who were part of a larger, very wealthy family here in the city of Charleston. Their father actually bought the Hayward Washington house, which is a museum that we own today, and they did live for a time in that house. And that includes one of the Grimke sisters herself living in that house for some of her childhood. Now, who we talk about when we're talking about the Grimke sisters are Angelina and Sarah Grimke specifically. So again, part of a very large family, very wealthy family, very prominent slave-owning family. And the Grimke sisters, they were outspoken abolitionists. They saw their mother beat one of the enslaved workers, and it just appalled them to a huge level that they started to loudly advocate against being enslavement at all. And so what they also did, not only were they against enslavement, not only were they abolitionists, but they were very outspoken about women's rights and the right for women to vote and to be independent. And in Charleston in the 1700s, 1800s, not really well received on either stance, again, being abolitionists and being for women's rights. So the Grimke sisters eventually do leave Charleston and end up actually in Pennsylvania as part of the Quaker community, which is a little bit more accepting to their beliefs at that time. But they were very outspoken, which for women at that time was not really known to exist either. So very great role models to have and very important history figures that we have here in Charleston.
Yeah, and I feel like even more rare because they came from a very comfortable living situation.
Yes.
And now another woman that you highlight is Judith Giton, who did not come from any type of similar background.
Yes.
Can you touch on her?
Of course. So Judith Giton might be a name that most of our viewers, most of us aren't familiar with, and that's okay, but she is somebody who's very fascinating in our history here. So Judith Giton arrived from France as an indentured servant. Now her voyage was 9 months of peril and terrible situation, and the reason she and her family had left France was they were being persecuted for their religious beliefs. So they were Protestants, and at that time that was not allowed in the country of France. So they were leaving, they fled at night, they left their house in desperate, left everything behind. And unfortunately for Judith, her mom dies on the voyage, leaving her with her brothers. And her brother, one of them, dies once they make it to Bermuda. But the problem is, once they get to Bermuda, their captain was arrested for doing illegal activity. And so this voyage they had paid for, this voyage that was supposed to take them to Charleston, all of a sudden now they're stuck in Bermuda.
How long were they in Bermuda for?
They were in Bermuda for a little while, for several weeks, I believe.
Wow.
And so once they get to Bermuda, they have to find passage, but they have no money. So they are sold as indentured servants to get money to come to Charleston. And Judith arrives with one of her brothers who does survive. He dies pretty shortly after that. So she's alone in this new world, and she's an indentured servant working very hard, marries a man, he dies, marries a second man by the last name of Manigo.
We're familiar with
We're
Manigo.
very familiar with Manigo, and eventually that Manigo family becomes a very wealthy plantation-owning family here in Charleston, and eventually, I believe it was her great-great-grandson is Joseph Manigo of the Joseph Manigo house. So she starts as the matriarch of the Manigo family, but she doesn't see the true wealth of the family. Unfortunately, she doesn't survive that long, but her family becomes very wealthy and very successful here in the city of Charleston.
And now the museum houses a letter of hers, which I think is incredible. What does that letter entail?
So she wrote a letter back to one of her brothers stayed in France. He was fighting with the army, so he stayed, he was okay, he was protected. And so she just writes of their journey, and it's pretty much about their voyage and all the terrible perils that they faced and the situation that they're in, and now they have to be indentured. And so it just kind of gives a look into what she was experiencing and what she, felt and dealt with when she came here in a very new, scary place, losing everybody she had for the most part. So,
I know those are just two of the incredible women that you'll be highlighting tomorrow at the Heroines of History workshop. What will that entail?
So we're so excited to offer Heroines of History workshop. We've never done it before, but what better way to spend the month of March? I'm not sure. So we are actually having a workshop from 2 to 4 tomorrow for ages about anywhere from 6 to 12, and this is going to really dive deep into Charleston's women. So not just broad women in history, which are amazing as well, but focusing more on women that we have here or played a part in Charleston. So they'll get a special guided tour of the museum focused on the women who played the roles throughout the different times, from colonial time, Civil War, all the way up to the modern era. We'll also do some crafts and activities based off of them. So some of those crafts are using indigo dye, like Eliza Lucas Pinckney had introduced to the city of Charleston. We're also going to do some sword decorating for Bonny, who was a very fearsome female pirate who was actually from Charleston, at least from the ages of 6 to 16. She lives here. And then we also have a couple other crafts and activities, reading some of those letters, like Judith Giton's letter, a letter from a woman named Elizabeth Hearn, who was during colonial times. So not just kind of reading letters, analyzing, but also some hands-on fun activities too, to really bring the history of these women alive to a lot of young girls and young boys and whoever wants to attend.
How incredible is that, and how empowering is that
very much so.
for our kids? And now reservations are required, which you can make at charlestonmuseum.org. Elise, it is always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
We're back after this.